They say hindsight is 20/20ths, but when you're living in the moment, blind spots feel like comfort zones. I thought I had the perfect life, married to Emily for 8 years, a steady job as a project manager, a modest house in the suburbs, and Sunday brunches with friends where we'd all pretend adulthood wasn't exhausting. Emily was the type of woman who turned heads without trying, blonde, sharp features, confident in that effortless way. She worked in marketing, always talking about big projects, new clients, and networking events. I used to admire her ambition. I thought we were a team, but then things changed. It started small, the way cracks always do. She became obsessed with her phone, quick to flip it face down, stepping into another room to answer calls. When I asked, she'd smile and brush it off. "It's just work, Ryan. You wouldn't get it." Late nights at the office turned into entire weekends. She was too busy to spend time together. She started dressing differently, not that I minded, but it was noticeable. High-end clothes, expensive perfume I'd never smelled before. I remember joking, "Who are you trying to impress?" She laughed it off. "Myself. Isn't that enough?" I told myself not to overthink it. We'd been married long enough. Trust was supposed to be the default. But that uneasy feeling sat in my chest like a stone, and no matter how much I tried to ignore it, I knew something was wrong. Turns out, I was right, but nothing could have prepared me for what I was about to find out. It was a Thursday evening, one of those dull, gray days where even the sky seemed tired. Emily texted me around 6 p.m., "Working late again. Don't wait up." Nothing new there. I nodded to myself, set the phone down, and went back to half watching a game I didn't care about. But then I noticed she'd left her laptop on the kitchen counter. She never did that. Emily guarded her devices like they were filled with national secrets. I didn't want to be that husband, the one who snoops out of insecurity. But curiosity has a funny way of justifying itself when something feels off. I opened it. No password. That alone felt strange. She always had it locked. Maybe she was in a rush. Maybe she got careless. Her email was open. Not her work email, her personal one. And right there, in bold, was a message with the subject line, "Last night was unforgettable. When can I see you again?" My heart started pounding. I clicked the sender's name, Daniel Monroe. I didn't recognize the name, but the content made my stomach twist. "You looked stunning in Paris. I can't stop thinking about you. The suite felt empty without you this morning. Counting down until our next escape. Love you. Paris?" She'd told me she was in Chicago for a client meeting last month. I kept scrolling, finding more emails, dozens of them. Flights booked to luxury destinations, hotel confirmations, dinner reservations at places I'd only seen in magazines. Pictures too, selfies of them on yachts, at rooftop bars, her in dresses I'd never seen before, looking like she belonged in his world more than she ever did in ours. I googled his name, Daniel Monroe, tech entrepreneur, net worth in the millions. The kind of guy who probably didn't even bother checking price tags. I felt like the floor had disappeared. My wife wasn't just cheating, she was living an entirely different life behind my back. And the worst part? She didn't even try to hide it. Well, I sat there, staring at the screen, numb. My whole marriage reduced to digital receipts and love letters from a man who had everything I apparently didn't. The anger didn't come right away. First, there was disbelief. Then a cold, hollow ache, and then, the rage. But I wasn't going to text her. Not yet. I needed to look her in the eyes when I tore the truth out of her. The hours between finding the emails and Emily walking through the door felt like years. My mind raced, flipping between flashes of anger and moments of disbelief. I sat in the dark, the only light coming from the TV I'd left on without really watching. Duke, our golden retriever, lay at my feet, blissfully unaware that our lives had just imploded. Around 10 p.m., I heard her car pull into the driveway. My heart started pounding, not with fear, but with this raw, unfiltered rage boiling just beneath the surface. She walked in like nothing was wrong, heels clicking against the hardwood floor, designer bag slung over her shoulder, her phone in hand like always. She didn't even notice me at first, sitting there in the shadows, working late. Huh? I said, my voice low but steady. She jumped slightly, surprised to see me awake. Ryan? What are you doing up? I didn't respond. I just slid her laptop onto the coffee table, the screen still open to the email from Daniel Monroe. Her face froze. No words, no fake smile. Just this flicker of panic in her eyes before she masked it with that cold, calculated calm she'd perfected over the years. What's this? I asked, though we both knew the answer. She set her bag down slowly, like she was buying time. It's not what you think. I laughed, one of those bitter, hollow laughs you don't plan. Oh, really? Because it looks exactly like what I think. Romantic emails. Flights. Hotels. Paris, Emily. She crossed her arms, her expression shifting from guilt to irritation, like I was the one being unreasonable. I didn't want you to find out this way. This way? Like there was a better way to find out your wife's been screwing a millionaire behind your back. How long? I demanded. She hesitated, then sighed like I was exhausting her. About a year. A year. 12 months of lies. Of dinners where she smiled across the table at me, pretending nothing was wrong. Of mornings where she kissed me goodbye, only to board a plane to some luxury suite with him. Why? My voice cracked, the question slipping out before I could stop it. What did I do wrong? She rolled her eyes, like I was being dramatic. It's not about you, Ryan. Daniel, he offers me a life you can't. The trips, the excitement, the freedom. The money, you mean? I snapped. She didn't deny it. That I stood up, feeling like the walls were closing in. You could have left. You could have said something. But instead, you chose to lie. Over and over. She shrugged. I didn't want to hurt you. I stared at her, stunned. You didn't want to hurt me? Emily, you shattered me. There was nothing left to say. No apology would have mattered. No explanation could undo what she'd done. So, I picked up my keys and left. I drove aimlessly for hours, the city lights blurring past as I replayed every moment of our marriage, trying to figure out when it all started to fall apart. But the truth was, I'd never know, because the woman I thought I married was a stranger. I drove through the night, past familiar streets that now felt foreign, as if the betrayal had repainted the city in dull, lifeless shades. The quiet hum of the engine was the only thing grounding me. No destination in mind, just driving to escape the weight sitting on my chest. Eventually, I found myself parked at an empty overlook just outside of town. I turned off the engine, and for the first time in hours, the silence hit me like a punch. The truth had settled in now. Emily wasn't the person I thought she was. Our marriage wasn't the solid foundation I believed it to be. It was all an illusion, carefully crafted with half-truths and well-timed lies. I stared at the dashboard, hands gripping the steering wheel, waiting for the anger to subside. But it didn't. It simmered beneath the surface, boiling with every memory that flashed through my mind, our wedding day, the vacations, the late-night talks about our future. All of it tainted now, poisoned by her choices. I didn't cry. I thought I would, but I didn't. I was too numb, like my emotions were stuck somewhere between disbelief and rage. As the sky started to lighten with the first hints of dawn, I drove back, not because I wanted to see her, but because it was still my house. I wasn't going to let her push me out of my own life. When I walked through the door, she was there, sitting on the couch like she'd been waiting. She didn't look guilty. She looked annoyed, like I was the inconvenience in this situation. Ryan, we need to talk, she started, her voice calm, controlled. I dropped my keys on the table, not even looking at her. I don't think there's anything left to say. She stood up, her arms crossed. Don't be childish. We're adults. We can handle this like adults. I snapped, finally turning to face her. You mean like how you handled sneaking around with Daniel for a year? Like that? She rolled her eyes again, that same dismissive gesture that made my blood boil. It's not like I planned for this to happen. It just did. I took a deep breath, trying to hold back the urge to yell. People don't accidentally end up in luxury hotel suites with millionaires, Emily. That's not something that just happens. She didn't respond. She didn't have to. The silence was louder than any excuse she could have given. I'm filing for divorce, I said finally, the words sharp and final. She shrugged, like she'd been expecting it. Fine. But I'm keeping the house. That's when I realized, she wasn't sorry. Not for cheating, not for lying, not for any of it. She'd already moved on, already decided I was just a chapter in her story, but she was wrong about one thing, that I wasn't going to let her write the ending. The morning after I told Emily I was filing for divorce, I packed a bag, just the essentials. I wasn't running away, but I couldn't stay in that house. Not with her smug indifference lingering in every room. The walls felt suffocating, filled with echoes of lies I hadn't noticed before. As I zipped my bag, Emily stood in the doorway, leaning casually like we were discussing weekend plans. She sipped her coffee, completely unfazed. So, where are you going to stay? She asked, her tone light, almost amused that I didn't answer. Not because I didn't have one, but because her question didn't deserve one. I grabbed my keys, slung the bag over my shoulder, and walked out without looking back. That I ended up at my best friend, Mike's, apartment. Mike had been my go-to guy since college. No judgments, no unnecessary advice, just someone who'd sit with you in the wreckage and not ask why it happened. When he opened the door, I must have looked like hell because he didn't say a word. Just stepped aside and let me in. We sat on his worn-out couch, drinking cheap beer at 10 a.m. like it was the most normal thing in the world. After a while, he finally asked, "You okay?" I laughed, dry, bitter, hollow. "She's been sleeping with some millionaire named Daniel Monroe. For a year." Mike didn't respond right away. He just nodded slowly, took another sip of his beer, then said, "What a bitch." It was the perfect response. Over the next few days, I crashed on Mike's couch, trying to piece together my life. The hardest part wasn't the betrayal, it was the realization that I'd been living in a lie. Every "I love you," every anniversary, every little gesture that felt meaningful was just counterfeit. Then came the paperwork. Emily's lawyer sent over the divorce documents like it was a business transaction. No note, no apology. Just cold, sterile legal jargon. She wanted the house. She wanted the car. She even had the nerve to list emotional distress as part of her claim. That was my breaking point. I called her. I didn't plan what I was going to say, I just knew I couldn't let her get the last word. She answered on the second ring. "Ryan," she said, her voice dripping with that fake patience she reserved for people she thought were beneath her. "I just wanted to say thank you," I said. She hesitated. "For what?" "For showing me exactly who you are," I replied. "I wasted years trying to build a life with someone who never existed. But now? Now I'm free." She scoffed, clearly annoyed that I wasn't begging or breaking down. "You're pathetic." "No," I said, smiling for the first time in days. "I'm finally not." Then I hung up. That was the last time I ever spoke to her, and it was the first time I felt like I'd won. After that final call with Emily, something shifted inside me. It wasn't like flipping a switch where everything suddenly felt better. No, it was more like realizing the fire had burned everything to the ground, and all that was left was ash, and somehow, standing in the ash felt better than pretending the fire hadn't happened. That I spent the next few weeks at Mike's place, my life crammed into a duffel bag at the foot of his couch. It wasn't glamorous: instant noodles, lukewarm coffee, and a view of the parking lot from his third-floor window, but at least it was honest. No lies tucked into the cushions, no ghosts hiding in the closet. Meanwhile, Emily moved fast. Too fast. Photos of her and Daniel Monroe started popping up online, not the private ones I'd found in her emails, but public ones. Paparazzi shots of them leaving fancy restaurants, her wearing designer clothes I'd never seen, smiling like betrayal was her favorite accessory. There was even an article titled, "Tech Mogul Daniel Monroe Spotted with Stunning New Girlfriend." No mention of me, of course. I was just the invisible chapter she'd torn out of her story. I'd be lying if I said it didn't hurt. Seeing her looking so happy, so untouched by the wreckage she'd left behind, felt like a punch to the gut. But beneath the sting, there was something else, something like clarity. She'd never been my Emily. The version I loved was just a well-rehearsed role she played until a better offer came along. One night, after too many beers, Mike and I sat on the balcony, the cold air biting at our faces. "You ever think about going after him?" Mike asked, half joking, half serious. I laughed, shaking my head. "What's the point? He didn't steal her. She gave herself away." Mike nodded, taking a swig from his bottle. "Yeah, but still, the guy's a douche." He wasn't wrong. A week later, I went back to the house, not to see Emily, but to get the rest of my stuff. She wasn't there. Good. I didn't want to see her. The place felt different without her in it. Empty, but not in a sad way. More like, peaceful. I walked through each room, grabbing what was mine, books, clothes, old photo albums. I left the wedding album. I didn't need it. What was the point of holding on to pictures of a life that wasn't real? In our bedroom, I found one of her expensive perfumes on the dresser. The same one she'd started wearing when the affair began. I picked it up, stared at it for a moment, then tossed it in the trash. It felt like closure, even if it was just a bottle of overpriced lies. As I loaded the last box into my car, I took one final look at the house. The place where I thought we'd grow old together. The place where I thought love was enough. It wasn't. Driving away, I didn't feel the sadness I expected. No tears, no dramatic music playing in my head. Just freedom. A clean break from a life I didn't recognize anymore. Back at Mike's, I unpacked the boxes, realizing how little of my life was actually tied to her. A few shirts, some books, a handful of memories that didn't hurt anymore. That night, lying on the couch with Duke curled up beside me, I thought about everything I'd lost, and realized it wasn't much, because the truth was, I hadn't lost a wife. I'd lost an illusion. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like myself again. Life after Emily wasn't some overnight transformation. There was no magical moment ere the clouds parted and everything suddenly made sense. It was slower than that, like learning to walk again after forgetting how. The first thing I did was delete her number. It sounds small, but it felt huge. That string of digits had been my connection to her for years, but now it was just dead weight. Gone in seconds. I thought I'd feel a pang of regret after hitting delete, but I didn't. Just a quiet sort of relief. Mike's couch had become my temporary home, but after a month, I realized I couldn't live in limbo forever. So, I found an apartment, a small, two-bedroom place on the edge of town with creaky floors and outdated cabinets. It wasn't much, but it was mine. No shared memories tucked into the walls, no ghosts of arguments, no lingering scent of Emily's perfume. Just empty rooms waiting for new beginnings. Moving in felt like closing a chapter. I carried boxes filled with what was left of my old life, clothes, a few books, framed photos of friends, none of Emily, and, of course, Duke's bed. He adjusted faster than I did, probably because dogs don't overthink things. They don't sit around wondering what went wrong or why wasn't I enough. They just move forward, tails wagging, hearts open. I envied him for that. The first night in the new place, I sat on the floor with a beer in hand, staring at the bare walls. There was no furniture yet, just Duke beside me and the hum of silence filling the space. But it wasn't the suffocating kind of silence I'd felt with Emily toward the end. This was different. This was peaceful. I started doing things I hadn't done in years. Simple stuff, really. Cooking meals instead of ordering takeout because she was always too busy to eat together. Playing guitar again, even though I was rusty and the strings needed replacing. I even signed up for a weekend hiking group, something Emily would have scoffed at as a waste of time. One Saturday, a few months after moving in, Mike and I met up for drinks. We sat at a dive bar downtown, the kind with sticky floors and cheap beer, the kind that didn't pretend to be anything fancy. "So," Mike said, raising his glass, "how's the single life treating you?" I chuckled, taking a sip. "Honestly? Better than I expected." He nodded, then leaned back. "You seem different. Lighter." I thought about that for a second. He was right. I did feel lighter, not because I'd moved on from Emily, but because I'd moved on from the version of myself that was tied to her. That night, walking home, I realized something. Emily's betrayal had been the worst thing to happen to me, but it also forced me to face parts of myself I'd ignored. The parts that settled for less, that believed love was supposed to be hard, that mistook comfort for happiness. She took a lot when she left, our marriage, our home, our future plans, but she didn't take me that I was still here, and for the first time in years, that felt like enough. Life had settled into something resembling normal. I had routines now, morning coffee with Duke snoring at my feet, late-night runs to clear my head, weekends filled with small adventures I never knew I'd enjoy. There was peace in the simplicity, a kind of freedom I hadn't realized I was missing during my years with Emily. But life has a funny way of testing you when you least expect it. It was a random Tuesday evening. I'd just come back from a late jog, sweat dampening my shirt, Duke pacing around for his dinner. My phone buzzed on the counter. I glanced at it, expecting a message from Mike about our weekend plans, but it wasn't Mike. It was her. "Emily, hey, Ryan. I was thinking about you today. Hope you're doing okay." For a moment, I just stared at the screen, my chest tightening with a rush of emotions I wasn't prepared for. It had been months, no contact, no updates, nothing. She'd disappeared into Daniel Monroe's Millionaire world, leaving me to sift through the ruins, and now, here she was, casually dropping into my inbox like we were old friends catching up. I didn't respond. Not right away. I put the phone down, fed Duke, showered, even made myself dinner. But the message sat there like a splinter, small but impossible to ignore. After hours of pacing, thinking, overthinking, I finally replied. "Me, why are you texting me?" The reply came fast. "Too fast, Emily, I just wanted to check in. I know things ended badly. I've been thinking about you a lot." "Thinking about me?" I almost laughed out loud. She'd been busy traveling the world with her millionaire boyfriend, living the life she apparently deserved, and now she was thinking about me. I typed a response, deleted it. Typed another. Deleted that too. I wasn't going to let her pull me into whatever game she was playing. But curiosity is a stubborn thing. Me, why now? Another quick reply, "Emily, Daniel and I broke up. It wasn't what I thought it would be. I guess I just miss what we had." There it was. The real reason, she didn't miss me. She missed the security, the comfort, the version of me that would have welcomed her back without question. But that version of me didn't exist anymore. She'd burned him to the ground. I stared at her message for a long time. My chest felt tight, not with sadness, but with something sharper, clarity. I realized I didn't feel what I thought I would. No ache. No longing. Just a cold, clear understanding of who she really was. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. The next day, I woke up feeling lighter, like I'd finally slammed a door I didn't even realize was still cracked open. Emily's message wasn't a spark reigniting old feelings, it was the final confirmation that I was free. Weeks passed. She never texted again, but her message gave me something I didn't expect, closure, not because of what she said, but because of how little it mattered. And for the first time in a long time, I wasn't looking back. After Emily's message, I expected a flood of emotions. Maybe sadness, maybe a twisted nostalgia. But what hit me instead was relief, pure, unfiltered relief. Like realizing you've been carrying a heavy bag for miles and finally setting it down, wondering why you didn't do it sooner. I thought I'd be angry, too. Furious that she had the audacity to reach out after shattering our marriage like it was nothing more than a delicate glass ornament. But I wasn't. That was the most surprising part. I felt nothing for her anymore. She was like a distant memory, faint and irrelevant, the details blurry at the edges. The day after her message, I went through my phone and deleted everything, her number, old photos, even texts from when we were happy. It felt like cleaning out a junk drawer, getting rid of things that served no purpose anymore, but the true moment of closure came unexpectedly. A few weeks later, I was grabbing coffee from this small shop downtown. It was one of those cozy places with mismatched furniture and chalkboard menus. I liked it because it felt honest, nothing polished, nothing fake. Just real. As I waited in line, I saw her, Emily. She was sitting by the window, scrolling through her phone, her hair pulled back in that effortless style she used to wear when she wanted to look like she wasn't trying. She looked the same. But something about her felt smaller, like she didn't take up as much space as she used to in my life, or my mind. She didn't see me at first, and for a moment, I thought about turning around, leaving before she noticed. But I didn't. I ordered my coffee, then walked right past her table. She looked up. Our eyes met, her expression shifted, surprise, maybe even a hint of regret. She opened her mouth like she was about to say something, but I just nodded slightly, a polite, indifferent acknowledgement, and kept walking. No words. No confrontation. Just a passing glance between two people who used to be everything to each other and now were nothing. I walked out of that coffee shop feeling like I'd just crossed an invisible line, one I didn't even know I was standing at. Later that night, sitting on my apartment floor with Duke sprawled next to me, I realized something simple but profound. I was done, not the pretend I'm over it kind of done. Not the fake it till you make it kind, the real kind, the kind where you don't just survive what happened to you, you outgrow it. Emily had been a part of my story, sure. But she wasn't the story. She wasn't the plot twist that defined me or the heartbreak that would haunt me. She was just a chapter, and I'd finally turned the page. The next morning, I woke up early, brewed my coffee, and sat on the balcony watching the sunrise. No heavy thoughts, no lingering what-ifs. Just me, the fresh air, and the quiet comfort of knowing that sometimes the best closure is no closure at all, just moving forward. After that fleeting encounter with Emily at the coffee shop, I expected to feel something more, an echo of the past, maybe a sting of regret, but instead, all I felt was peace. Real, undeniable peace. It was like meeting an old version of myself across the room and realizing we'd both outgrown each other. The days that followed felt lighter, like I'd shed the last layer of emotional baggage I didn't even realize I was still carrying. My apartment, once just a temporary refuge, now felt like home. The blank walls I'd been too lazy to decorate didn't feel empty anymore, they felt full of possibilities. No ghosts lived there, only space for new memories. One evening, after work, I found myself walking past a local community center. There was a flyer taped to the door, photography workshop, capture life's moments. I'd always been interested in photography but never pursued it seriously. It was one of those things Emily used to dismiss. Why would you waste money on something like that, she'd say. Funny how small comments like that stick with you, chipping away at parts of yourself over time. But standing there, looking at that flyer, I thought, why not? So, I signed up. The first class was awkward. I was surrounded by people I didn't know, holding a camera I barely knew how to use. But there was something refreshing about being a complete beginner again. No expectations, no past failures hanging over my head, just me, learning something new because I wanted to. That's where I met Lena. She was different from Emily in every possible way. Where Emily was polished and calculated, Lena was vibrant and genuine, with a messy ponytail and a laugh that filled the room. We sat next to each other during the workshop, sharing awkward smiles and clumsy attempts at adjusting camera settings. After a few sessions, we started talking more, about photography, music, even the best local taco spots. She never pried into my past, and I never felt the need to overshare. There was no rush, no pressure. Just easy conversation. One night after class, she asked, "Want to grab a coffee?" For a split second, I hesitated, not because I wasn't interested, but because it felt like crossing into unfamiliar territory. Dating again. Opening myself up. But then I thought, this isn't about Emily. This is about me. So, I said yes. That coffee turned into hours of talking. We covered everything from our favorite movies to embarrassing childhood stories. There was no checklist, no hidden agenda. Just two people enjoying each other's company. As weeks turned into months, Lena and I grew closer. It wasn't a whirlwind romance fueled by dramatic declarations or grand gestures. It was slow, steady, and real. She never made me feel like I had to prove my worth. I could just be, flawed, learning, healing. One evening, as we sat on my balcony, watching the city lights flicker below, Lena turned to me and said, "You've got this quiet strength about you. Like you've been through something, but you didn't let it break you." Her words hit me harder than I expected. Not because they reminded me of Emily, but because they didn't. They reminded me of me. I realized then that healing isn't about erasing the past. It's about outgrowing it. Emily's betrayal wasn't the end of my story. It was a plot twist, unexpected, painful, but necessary. Without it, I might have never found the courage to rediscover who I really was. I didn't need closure from Emily because I'd given it to myself. I didn't need to win some imaginary battle because walking away had been the victory all along. Months later, I found one of the last photos Emily and I had taken together, tucked in an old drawer. I looked at it for a moment, not with sadness, but with gratitude. Not because I missed her, but because that chapter led me here, to a life I built on my own terms, with people who saw me, not just the version of me that fit their expectations. I tossed the photo in the trash, closed the drawer, and picked up my camera instead, because life isn't about holding on to the past. It's about capturing the moments that matter now, and this was my new beginning. Life has a funny way of unfolding when you least expect it. After tossing that last photo of Emily, it felt like closing a door, not slamming it in anger, but gently shutting it because the room was empty, and I didn't need to be there anymore. Lena and I continued seeing each other, but it wasn't the center of my world like my relationship with Emily had been. I wasn't looking to be saved, and Lena wasn't trying to fix me. We were just two people sharing time, laughter, and occasionally burning dinner together. That was enough. But this isn't a love story about me and Lena. This is about me finding me again. One weekend, I decided to take a solo road trip. No itinerary, no specific destination, just me, Duke in the passenger seat, and miles of open road ahead. I packed my camera, some clothes, and a playlist filled with songs I used to love before Emily's opinions made me feel embarrassed about them. Funny how relationships can do that, make you shrink little pieces of yourself to fit into someone else's mold. I drove through small towns, hiked trails I'd never heard of, and took photos of everything: old barns, sunsets bleeding into mountains, Duke's goofy face sticking out of the car window, tongue flapping in the wind. It was the first time in years I wasn't performing for anyone. No captions, no filters. Just me, experiencing life as it was. One night, I camped out by a lake, the sky stretched wide with stars. I sat by a small fire, Duke curled up beside me, and I thought about everything I'd been through, the betrayal, the heartbreak, the anger. It wasn't like it vanished. It was there, woven into my story, but it didn't define me anymore. I realized I wasn't broken. I'd been bent, sure, twisted by love and loss, but not shattered. The next morning, as I packed up, I found an old notebook at the bottom of my bag, something I'd thrown in without thinking. I flipped through empty pages until I landed on a blank one. Without overthinking it, I wrote, "I'm not the man she left. I'm the man who survived." I didn't write more because I didn't need to. When I got back home, I framed one of the photos from the trip, a simple shot of Duke sitting by the lake, looking out at the water, his silhouette bathed in the orange glow of dawn. I hung it on the wall in my apartment, not as a reminder of the past, but as proof of the future I'd carved out for myself. Emily was gone. That chapter was over, but I was still here, alive. Whole. Moving forward, and for the first time in a long time, I wasn't running from anything, that I was running towards something. As the weeks turned into months, my life felt like it had been rewritten, not with dramatic changes, but with quiet, deliberate choices. The kind that added up to something real, that I wasn't haunted by Emily anymore. Thoughts of her were like old songs on the radio. You recognize them, maybe even hum along for a second, but you don't feel the need to replay them. She had become background noise to the life I was living now. One evening, I was walking Duke through a park near my apartment. The sky was painted in streaks of orange and purple, the air crisp with the first hints of fall. It was the kind of peaceful scene you'd scroll past on social media, not realizing how much it mattered until you were living it. That's when I saw her, Emily. She was sitting alone on a bench, scrolling through her phone. No Daniel Monroe. No designer bag. Just her, in an ordinary sweatshirt, looking small. Smaller than I remembered. Her presence didn't carry the weight it once did. She was just a person. Not the woman who broke my heart, not the villain in my story, just someone passing through. She looked up and saw me. Our eyes met. For a moment, there was a flicker of recognition, maybe even regret in her expression. She stood up, hesitated, then walked toward me. Ryan, she said softly, her voice thinner than I remembered. I stopped, Duke's leash loose in my hand. Emily. There was an awkward silence, the kind filled with all the things left unsaid. You look good, she offered, as if that was enough to bridge the gap between us. I nodded. Thanks. You too. She forced a smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. I've thought about reaching out. I just didn't know what to say. I didn't respond right away. I didn't need to. Her words hung in the air, meaningless echoes of a past that no longer belonged to me. After a pause, I simply said, "There's nothing to say." She opened her mouth like she wanted to argue, to explain, but then she closed it. Maybe she realized I didn't owe her anything, not closure, not forgiveness, not even this conversation. I gave her a polite nod and kept walking, Duke trotting beside me, his tail wagging like nothing had happened. And in a way, nothing had. That brief encounter didn't stir up old wounds. It didn't unravel the progress I'd made. If anything, it solidified it. She was just a face in a crowd now. When I got home, I sat on the balcony with Duke, the city lights blinking softly in the distance. I thought about how far I'd come, not just from Emily, but from the version of myself who thought my worth depended on someone else's love. I pulled out the old notebook I'd taken on my road trip and flipped to the page where I'd written, "I'm not the man she left. I'm the man who survived." Beneath it, I wrote, "And now, I'm the man who's living." Because surviving is just the beginning, living, that's the real victory. After that last encounter with Emily, life carried on, not with dramatic revelations or emotional breakdowns, just the simple, steady rhythm of moving forward. It's funny how you expect closure to be this grand, defining moment, but in reality, it often comes quietly, like a door gently closing behind you without a sound. I didn't think about her much after that. She faded into the background of my life, like an old photograph tucked into a dusty box you never bother to open. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't sad. I just wasn't anything about her. And that was the biggest sign I'd truly healed. I threw myself into photography more than ever. What started as a hobby turned into a passion. I began capturing stories, strangers on the street, landscapes at dawn, moments that felt raw and real. My lens showed me the world from new angles, including myself. Lena and I stayed friends. She remained a part of my life, but not as a rebound or some desperate attempt to fill the void Emily left. She was just Lena, genuine, kind, and effortless in a way I never thought possible. We shared laughs, stories, and quiet moments that didn't need to be defined by labels. Whether it turned into something more didn't matter. What mattered was that I had learned to be whole on my own. One day, I found myself going through an old box of stuff from my marriage, not because I missed it, but because I was cleaning out my closet, both literally and metaphorically. There were old anniversary cards, a few dusty souvenirs from trips, and a journal Emily had once gifted me that I flipped through it, expecting to feel something. But there was nothing. Just pages from a past life that no longer felt like mine. That I packed it all into a trash bag and took it out without hesitation. No dramatic pauses, no second thoughts. Just gone. Later that evening, I sat on my balcony, Duke resting his head on my foot like he always did, the sun dipping below the horizon. I thought about everything, where I started, where I'd been, and where I was going. That I pulled out my notebook one last time. Underneath the words, "I'm not the man she left. I'm the man who survived, and, now, I'm the man who's living," I wrote, "and I'm finally free. Because that's the truth, that I wasn't just over her. I was beyond her. My life wasn't about the betrayal, the heartbreak, or even the healing. That it was about what came after, and for me, that was everything.